We now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, for 5 minutes.
Director Chopra, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, sir.
All right, cool, man. All right. It's been a long day. Hey, listen, from what I understand, the CFPB is considering significant changes to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, including broadening the scope of what constitutes a consumer reporting agency to basically any entity that compiles and makes available consumer financial information, whether or not it is used for eligibility decisions. The Bureau's authority is limited to regulations that are necessary and appropriate to carrying out the objectives of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act outlined includes a broad and novel definition of data broker, which seems to contradict decades of regulatory guidance, case law, and congressional intent. In your view, where is CFPB getting the authority under its limited rulemaking provisions to create this new definition of a data broker?
Well, I'm happy to share more information with you from the outline, but we have lots of data brokers assembling dossiers on all of us that are being used for sale for a whole set of purposes, including sale to state and non-state actors.
I understand
so
that,
we are trying to, oh, go ahead.
But Director, where does CFPB get the additional authority to make a rule around this or to expand that definition? Because that's a congressional provision. That is not for an agency to make that determination.
Well, I mean, if it's a consumer reporting agency, and I shared this before, I think it's better for us to go through the process of explaining what are the indicia that would trigger these obligations. We can pursue it through an enforcement-only process, but we're studying the market to see how these consumer reporting agencies have evolved over time. We have lots of background screening companies, tenant screening companies, others. They all comply.
And
that's what we're trying to use. We're only going to use the statute as Congress has written.
Well, I would say that sounds good, but looking at the history of agencies in Congress, what we are initially told we're only used for is always expanded at some point in the future. That is the concern of mine. I want to switch gears.
Well, then you should amend the statute then. I think if I
now that is something that I think we probably would find agreement on, that Congress
totally
should do its job and amend statutes as necessary.
I totally support, and it's easier for the agencies when you all, on these privacy issues, emerging issues, we're very happy to work with you on them. It makes
I'm going to reclaim my time.
Sorry.
The only thing I would say is that I think that if Congress actually takes its Article 1 power seriously, which I think we should go through and review a whole host of financial regulatory statutes to make sure that the credit raising and capital disbursement mechanisms of our economy are clear and not bogged down by red tape, which is unfortunately has occurred over many decades, far before you and before me, and we got to get that cleared up. One thing I want to come to real quickly, and this is dealing with data breaches. It appears that CFPB intends to include a strict liability standard with respect to data breaches or unauthorized accesses to credit report information by third parties. Do you think the compliance costs are overly burdensome on these institutions if essentially the institutions are going to have a strict liability standard tied to them? I mean, it's not like they're begging to get breached. The companies.
So I think the question is often on unauthorized access. We have not proposed that. It is something that we're talking to the small entity representatives through the SBREFA process about unauthorized, or how a set of data might be used or shared. There is sometimes an issue where they are sharing it, but then it says that it was unauthorized. So we're working through all of that before we propose it.
The one thing I would vehemently stress is we should not be assigning strict liability standards to any of these institutions. I mean, obviously, the regulatory burdens here in the United States of America are large enough as is. Applying strict liability over data breaches when it's clear that unless there is proof that the institutions actually invited the data breach on purpose, we should not be applying that level of liability to them. Nobody wants to see data breaches. I want to be clear on that. But we have to be careful and mindful of the fact that our institutions, our financial institutions, they don't want that either. Real quick before I get out, Section 1071 rule, compilation of data for minority women-owned businesses. Obviously understanding that we want everybody to have full access to capital in our economy. Do you feel that the level of data being proposed in this rule is actually going to be more of a hindrance and a burden than it will actually, that as opposed to opening up flows of capital in the United States.
I'm hopeful that based on how we incorporated the comments, we complied with the statutory requirement, and there's lots of use cases for it, but we're doing exactly what Congress asked us to do.
Well, I would argue what Congress asked for under Dodd-Frank was ridiculous, but that was another time. I hope to change that as well. Yield back, Chairman.